During the time of the First Crusade, the Arab world was divided and diseased by endless palace intrigues. It was the end of the golden age of the largest empire the world had ever known, and of which all Muslims had been so proud. In Baghdad, the caliphates no longer held royal power. This had passed into the hands of Persian or Turkish military chiefs. The capital was so absorbed in the endless power struggles between enemy brothers that the new fall of Jerusalem did not cause any great alarm. The Sultan was content with assigning a committee of investigation. In Syria, the local emirs did not view resistance against the invaders as a priority. Rather, they cared more about staying in power. Almost none of them died of natural causes. They were either stabbed, strangled, or poisoned. Each disappearance of an emir was accompanied by a palace battle between brothers or uncles, between slaves and eunuchs, between the deaf and dumb and the insane, and generally ended in a bloodbath. These potentates used the Crusaders to get rid of their close adversaries. Their armies looked for alliances against the common enemy of the moment. There were a whole series of alliances between Crusaders and Muslims against Muslims or Crusaders. These alliances often benefited the French, given that they showed as much craftiness or more than their adversaries. The end result of 2 centuries of crusades was ruinous. The overall cost in lives was tragic. The French kingdom lost the finest flower of its knighthood in the Middle East, for which it would pay dearly in the 100 Years' War against the English. The terrible memory the Christian West left in the Near East is still being paid for today. And the Crusades brought almost no benefits. It was without a doubt in Spain that the West was best able to learn from Arab civilization. In the Latin kingdoms of the Levant there was very little understanding. As for the Arabs, they were unable to glean the best of the Western renovation. During the time of the Crusades, their civilization was stagnated. The expansion of Islam as a religion, on the other hand, continued. Non-Arab Islam went on to conquer the north of India, and later expanded to Indonesia. The West became immersed in savage religious wars that led it to lose sight of the primary goal, the salvation of the soul. During this time, the Hindus lived only for this end. In India in the 12th century, Hinduism triumphed over Buddhism and absorbed it. Hinduism even coexisted with Islam. Hinduism is in essence polytheist, tolerant. The idea of a religious war was foreign to it, and this saved India from the unrest that afflicted the West. The expansion of Islam stopped at the Chinese border. At that time, civil life was of greater importance in China than spirituality, as it had also been in Roman times. Here too, society did not suffer the same agitation in the name of religion as the West did. The China of the 12th century enjoyed its Renaissance period. 3 centuries before the West, great inventions, gunpowder, the compass, the clock, led the Chinese advance over the West. The immense empire functioned thanks to the learned clergy, the mandarins, who controlled the country's administration. The chosen fortunates would become the consecrated mandarins of the Son of Heaven, the selected experts of the country, of the innumerable, the virtuous Jacobins of the Middle Kingdom. However, these same civil servants who dedicated their lives to the functioning of the state also played a pernicious role. Official China became a country of monolithic thinking. This eventually froze their brilliant civilization at the moment in which, 3 centuries later, the Renaissance would give the West its supremacy. Toledo falls. Later it will be the turn of Cordoba, the capital. The intellectual growth of Europe was due in large part to these cities. Already in the 8th century, Arab scholars had translated all of the ancient Greek and Roman works into Arabic. At Toledo and Cordoba, they were translated back into Latin from Arabic so that they could be sold to the Christians of the West. The diffusion of these translations throughout Europe led to general intellectual awakening, the flourishing of scholasticism and the universities such as the Sorbonne in Paris. This transmission of knowledge by the Arabs made the Renaissance possible. When the Spanish Catholics besieged Cordoba, the elites of the brilliant capital of Mozarabic Andalusia were forced to pack their bags. Mathematicians and doctors, poets and philosophers carried with them as many of their precious books as they could. They brought their books to the libraries of Granada. Granada would continue to be an Islamic emirate for another 2.5 centuries. When the Spanish definitively expelled the Arabs from Spain in 1492, the barons and archbishops burned their books, just like the Crusaders did in the Middle East.
This led Luther to conclude that faith was a gift of God, given to whoever was in the right state to receive it. Salvation was not accorded as payment for a certain number of good deeds, nor for being penitent or practicing the sacraments. Salvation came from submitting to God, from having faith in one's deliverance. Martin Luther rejected as impossible any ascension to saintliness. He who had wanted to scale the heavens now let himself be carried by the clouds of hope. He was a new man, and he felt compelled to share his revelation with humanity at large. Luther had come to this discovery all by himself. He therefore wrote that the gospel could not be taught. It was a matter of personal devotion. It was our duty to heed the word of God and interpret it for ourselves, not to have it interpreted by priests. Instead of the confining, punishing, and restrictive Christianity of the Church, he proposed one that was serene and relaxed and free. To prevent the empire being torn apart, the German Catholic states finally agreed in Augsburg in 1555 to accept the denominational division of Germany. There was one special proviso, however. While Catholics would be tolerated in the Protestant states, Protestants would not be tolerated in the Catholic territories. Migrations reinforced the differences between the Protestant north and the Catholic south of Germany. Even today, Bavaria and Austria are still largely Catholic. Writing off the loss of northern Germany, the Holy Roman Church turned to the recently discovered American continent with renewed vigor. The drive to Christianize the Indians, orchestrated by the newly created Jesuit order, was conducted with great ferocity. Those resisting baptism were often slaughtered or abandoned in the wilds. In other words, one could not be a good Christian without being able to read and write. In fact, Luther's reforms led to huge improvements in education throughout Europe, both the Protestant and Catholic parts. The Catholic hierarchy had taken note of the notoriously poor level of religious instruction. The Vatican called a council which would turn out to be one of the most important of its history, the Council of Trent, which paved the way for the Counter-Reformation. Henceforth, no priest could be ordained without first studying theology in their newly created seminaries. Teaching of the Catechism was made compulsory in schools and was to be available in every parish. His doctrine brought the Middle Ages to a close, spreading rapidly through northern Europe, from the Baltic states to Scotland, from Scandinavia to Switzerland. New forms of Protestantism, sometimes more radical than the original, would branch out, in Geneva especially, where Calvin founded an organized and democratic Reformed church, which, unlike Luther's, was separate from the state. In England, the rebellion against Rome was led not by the people or by an ordinary man, but by a king, Henry VIII, because the Pope refused to allow a divorce. The Catholic Counter-Reformation led to the wars of religion which raged throughout Europe. In France, between the Protestant Huguenots and the Catholics, and in Germany's 30 Years' War. In order to practice their new faith in peace, Protestants from all over Europe emigrated to America. While South America remained in the conservative grip of the Roman Church, North America became the refuge for every persecuted sect, a promised land for a nation of immigrants, whose success would persuade them that they truly were, in a typically Protestant expression, a predestined people, a people chosen by God. Primitive capitalism was born in the Italian republics, where its vigor would not last. With the spirit of reform now allied to an austere puritanical Calvinism, which favored saving rather than spending, and therefore investment, modern capitalism would blossom in the Protestant lands of Northern Europe and America.